I just wanted to check my balance, sir. The words slipped out in a thin whisper, swallowed by the vast marble lobby where every sound echoed, except the timid voice of the boy who had just stepped inside. He couldn't have been older than 10, yet he carried himself like someone who had lived far too much. His small hands held a piece of paper folded so many times that the edges had turned rough. He stopped right in the center of the reception area, where the bright lights bounced off his worn-out sneakers, making him look even more out of place. A child standing in a world that clearly wasn't built for him. Behind the counter, the manager straightened his dark suit and raised his eyebrows, puzzled. "I'm sorry. What exactly do you want to see?" he asked, a faint, involuntary smile pulling at his lips. The kind that appears before the brain has time to suggest restraint. The boy drew a deep breath, lifted the paper with more determination and repeated, "My balance, sir, it's important." The manager pressed his lips together and glanced at his co-workers, as if seeking witnesses to something absurd. Deep down, he found it amusing. A child asking to check a bank balance, especially in a place where adults in expensive suits argued over investments worth more than a car. "Kid, are you sure you're in the right place?" "Yes, sir." The silence that followed was awkward. A few clients in line turned their heads, curious. A woman clutched her purse to her chest, uneasy at the sight of a boy standing there alone. The manager finally rose to his feet. He walked toward the boy with slow, deliberate steps, as if approaching something too fragile or too foolish. Even he wasn't sure which one it was supposed to be. "May I see that paper?" The boy hesitated. His fingers tightened around the sheet until his knuckles turned pale. Handing it over felt like surrendering a piece of his life. Even so, he offered it. The manager took the paper. At first he looked at it without interest, almost rolling his eyes. But when he read the first line, his smirk flattened into a thin, rigid line. The document was real, not a joke. It was an old receipt, very old. A deposit slip from years ago, a deposit the boy couldn't possibly have made himself. The manager's heart stumbled, a tiny, involuntary jolt. He covered it quickly with a subtle throat clearing. "And where did you get this?" The boy lowered his gaze. "From home." "From home?" "Yes, sir. I found it in a box, and I need to know what's inside." More people turned their attention now, sensing that something had shifted. This wasn't funny anymore. It felt strange, as if the paper held a story none of them understood yet. The manager inhaled slowly, trying to re-establish control. "Kid, you realize this is from many years ago, right? These things aren't always straightforward. It might not even exist in the system anymore." The boy didn't answer. He simply swallowed hard and lifted his eyes, clinging to whatever hope he had left. "But I have to see it, sir, please." The plea struck him deeper than he wanted to admit. Still, he tried to maintain professional posture. "All right, come with me to my desk." The boy followed, taking small steps as if every movement carried the weight of his future. When he sat in front of the computer, the manager adjusted his leather chair and typed the account number from the paper. He typed it once, then again, and a third time. With each attempt, his expression shifted. First annoyance, then irritation, then something else. The screen loaded, and suddenly something appeared. The manager blinked, leaned closer, narrowed his eyes. None of it made sense. It couldn't possibly make sense. His mouth went dry. The breath trapped in his chest escaped in a short, shaky exhale. The boy shifted in his seat across from him. "So, how much is there, sir?" The manager didn't answer, because in that moment he understood that he had just unlocked something that should never have been forgotten, and the boy's life, and his own, was about to change forever. He remained still, staring at the child as if looking at a riddle that shouldn't be solved. Yet something in the kid's steady gaze, far too steady for someone so young, cracked the wall of arrogance he wore like a mask. "Let me see this again," the manager muttered, grabbing the paper without care. He folded it, unfolded it, brought it closer to his face. It was an ancient document, the kind of receipt the bank hadn't used in decades. The paper had yellowed, and the old Continental Bank emblem in the corner belonged to a template discontinued over 20 years earlier. The manager lifted his eyebrows. "Where did you get this?" "It's mine," the boy replied, without flinching, crossing his arms, as if the gesture itself gave him strength. "My dad told me that one day I should come here and ask to check the balance." A couple of clients nearby stopped to watch. A woman adjusted her purse strap. A man in a suit pretended to be waiting patiently, but his eyes stayed fixed on the unfolding drama. The manager clicked his tongue, irritated. "Listen, kid, this means nothing. Old papers like this get passed around all the time. Do you really think any child can walk into a bank, hand over some ancient slip, and expect everyone to drop everything and attend to him?" He expected the boy to shrink back, stare at the floor, maybe run. But he didn't. The kid planted his feet as if they were anchored to the floor. "My dad said you'd laugh at me, but he also said I shouldn't leave until someone showed me the balance." That sentence hit someone in the back of the room. A young employee with a badge around her neck turned sharply. She looked at the boy, then at the paper in the manager's hands. Her eyes narrowed, not in disdain, but in recognition. "Sir," she called, taking 2 cautious steps forward, "may I see the document?" The manager frowned, annoyed by the interruption, but handed it over anyway. She inspected every corner of the page, the fading stamp, the shaky, handwritten date, the signature that looked older than the paper itself. Then her lips parted ever so slightly, not in shock, but in doubt, as if she were looking at something that shouldn't exist anymore. "Sir, this looks like one of the old investment certificates from the headquarters branch, from the time the bank operated differently, before the mergers, before everything changed." The manager's expression shifted, though he tried to hide it. "Don't be absurd. All those documents were discontinued." "Not all," she murmured. "Some contracts from that period had automatic renewal clauses, annual updates, mandatory reinvestment. If this one is real—" Her sentence hung unfinished. The manager felt his heart give a heavy, uncomfortable thump. The woman breathed slowly, exchanging a loaded look with him, and the boy, standing in the middle of it all, didn't fully grasp what was happening, but he could feel something in the air was wrong. "Kid," the manager said, clearing his throat, "who's your father?" "He's dead," the boy replied, with a calm so cold it struck the marble floor like a stone. "But before that, he saved this paper for me. He said it was all I had." The employee lowered her eyes. The manager felt that sentence press against his pride like a weight he couldn't avoid. He inhaled deeply, trying to put his authority back on, but it didn't fit as easily as before. Something about that fragile piece of paper was shaking the ground beneath him. "Here's what I'll do," he said, trying to regain control. "I'll take this to the internal archive. We'll see if there's any record, but don't expect much. All right?" The boy just nodded, slow but firm. The manager turned away, followed by the employee, who walked briskly as if she were chasing a trail buried for decades. The boy stayed in the lobby, watching the busy movement around him, people rushing, voices overlapping, light reflecting off the polished floor. He held his own hands to stop them from shaking. He didn't understand numbers, contracts, or investments. He only knew that this paper was the last thing his father had left him. And in that heavy quiet, a question floated like an invisible echo. If that document really was genuine, what exactly was about to surface? The entire bank was going to find out soon enough. The manager took a deep breath, still recovering from the burst of laughter he'd let out minutes before. He tugged at his tie knot, shifted in his chair, and gave the boy a crooked smile, the smile of someone ready to toy with the situation before ending it. "All right, let's do this." He opened his arms theatrically. "If you have a balance, as you say, then you must have a bank account. In which branch did you open it? Or do you think money grows on rocks?" The boy pressed the paper against his chest for a moment, as if protecting something precious. His eyes wandered across the desks, the monitors, the glowing screens, then returned to the manager with the same quiet determination. "I don't know the branch. I only know this paper is mine." He held it out again, gently. "And they told me here is where I could see what's inside it." The manager raised his eyebrows. "Inside it?" He gave a short laugh. "My boy, this isn't a treasure chest." But the moment he finally took the paper, the laugh died in his throat. There was something unusual about it. An identification number so old it barely fit any current system. A faded seal he had seen only a handful of times during training about historical archives. A code that didn't match any modern format. It shouldn't exist, he thought. But it did, right there in his hands. He stole a glance at the boy, looking for any hint of a prank. But the kid stood still, clutching the strap of his backpack like it was the only anchor he had in the world. "Where did you get this?" the manager asked, his voice lower than he expected. "It came from my grandfather," the boy answered. "He told me this paper mattered, that I could only bring it when he—" The sentence died on his tongue, and the silence that followed somehow amplified everything around them. The clicking heels of the employees, the hum of money-counting machines, the faint rattle of coins being poured somewhere deeper in the building. The manager understood then that this situation was no longer simple. "Wait here," he stood abruptly. He took the paper and headed toward the frosted glass door that led to the restricted sector. Archives, audits, records that had never been digitized. Every step echoed across the marble floor. A few clients watched him go, unsure why a manager was suddenly descending into the depths of the bank over a child and an old piece of paper. Inside, the atmosphere shifted, cold, hushed, dense with the smell of metal and decades-old dust. He set the paper on a steel table, adjusted his glasses, and powered on the internal terminal, the one only directors could access, the system where the records that never appeared on ordinary computers were kept. He typed in the code. Nothing. Tried another variation. Still nothing. "This makes no sense," he muttered, irritation creeping into his voice. He tried again, and suddenly, the screen flickered. A loading bar appeared. Then a grey window popped up, so outdated it looked like it belonged on a computer from the late 90s. At the top, written in crooked letters, "Special Archive, Legacy Accounts." He leaned back a few centimeters. "Legacy accounts," he whispered. He pressed enter carefully, as if the key were wired to an explosive. The system demanded a maximum-level administrative password. He froze. This was serious, very serious. But instinct, whether fear, curiosity, or raw greed, ended up winning. He entered his personal code, the one reserved for confidential reports only. The screen loaded, the bar filled, and then a single line appeared in the center. "Owner, Succession Archive, minor heir, status, active account, balance, restricted access." A chill ran up his spine. An active balance on that document from an account that shouldn't even exist in the modern system. His pulse jumped. He hurried back to the lobby. No mocking smile on his face this time. Just tension. Just uncertainty. Just something he didn't understand. The boy was still in the same spot, hugging his backpack like a shield. When he saw the manager return so quickly, he took a step backward, bracing as if he were about to be scolded. "Come with me," the manager said, his tone so serious that even a nearby guard turned his head. "We need to talk somewhere else." "But did I do something wrong?" The boy's voice trembled. "No." The manager exhaled deeply. Quite the opposite. For a moment, he studied the child more closely. The messy hair, the worn jacket, the fear in his eyes that suggested he'd endured far too much for someone his age. "If what I saw is real—" The rest of the thought dissolved in his mind. He gestured for the boy to follow. The child tightened his grip on the backpack and walked behind him. What waited down that restricted corridor would reshape not only the boy's life, but the entire history of that bank. And it was only the beginning. The boy swallowed hard, realizing everyone around was staring at him, not with sympathy, but with amusement. He had become an unexpected spectacle in a place where everything gleamed: polished shoes, straightened ties, sleek leather folders, and egos floating like the scent of expensive cologne. He kept his eyes on the manager, squeezing the folded paper between his fingers. Asking to check a balance sounded simple, but in that atmosphere, it felt like breaking some unspoken rule. "Let me see," the manager muttered, shaking his head with exaggerated drama. He plucked the paper from the boy's hand without the slightest care. "Do you even know what a balance is? What did you think you'd find here?" His laugh echoed louder this time. A few people in the waiting area shifted in their seats, whispering. An elderly man frowned, uncomfortable. A well-dressed woman pulled her purse into her lap, as if the child were a threat. The boy stayed upright. His courage wasn't just born from need. It came from something that had been lodged in his throat for weeks. "I want to see the balance of that account, please," he repeated, without breaking eye contact. The manager flipped the paper toward himself, fully prepared to mock him again. He hadn't even read it properly yet, already rehearsing thoughts like, "Poor kid thinking he has a bank account," or "Where are your parents?" But before he could open his mouth, he stopped. His body froze mid-movement. His eyes narrowed. The amusement drained off his face. Something on the paper had altered his breathing. He leaned in, almost pressing his nose to the page, as if he needed absolute certainty. His once confident hand trembled just slightly. The boy noticed. Expectation replaced timid fear in his expression. "Sir," he whispered. The manager didn't answer. He couldn't. At the back of the agency, two employees exchanged glances, sensing the sudden shift. A security guard took a step forward, curious but still silent. The manager cleared his throat, trying to rebuild the posture that had just crumbled. This can't be right," he muttered to himself. "Who gave this to you?" "My grandfather," the boy said, clutching the hem of his shirt. "He told me I needed to check the balance today." Another chill crawled down the manager's spine. Grandfather, balance, old document. Those three pieces collided in his mind like a silent explosion. He flipped the paper again, studying the ancient stamp, the kind the bank hadn't used in decades. But it was there, authentic, preserved, almost perfectly intact despite its age. One of the older tellers noticed the hesitation and approached quietly. "Everything all right, sir?" The manager didn't reply. He simply raised one finger, demanding silence. The atmosphere, once noisy and restless, seemed to hold its breath. The boy inhaled slowly. He didn't know what was happening, but he understood that something had shifted. Then the manager spoke, without looking at anyone else. "Come with me." The words dropped into the lobby like a stone. Heads turned. The boy took a step back, startled. The manager quickly lifted his hand, as if stopping him from bolting. "Don't worry, you need to see something." The boy hesitated for a moment, then followed. They crossed the lobby in silence. Every step seemed to thicken the tension. The manager walked fast, clutching the paper in his hand, making sure no one else caught even a glimpse of what was written on it. They stopped in front of a frosted glass door, labeled Historical Archive Division. The manager took a long breath before opening it. "Go in," he said. The boy stepped inside slowly, greeted by the smell of aging paper and thin layers of dust. Tall shelves stretched to the ceiling, packed with yellowed folders and sealed boxes. It felt like stepping into a frozen version of the bank's past. The manager closed the door behind them and locked it. The boy's heart jumped. "Sir, why did you lock it?" The manager turned slowly, holding the paper with a cautiousness that completely contradicted the way he'd handled it minutes earlier. "Because what's written here," he said, tapping the page with his finger, "is far too serious to be exposed out there." The boy's eyes widened. "But it's just the balance, isn't it?" The manager inhaled deeply. "No, it's not just that." The boy shifted back a step. "Then, what is it?" The manager opened his mouth to answer, but his voice cracked. He had to swallow hard before trying again. "This document belongs to an account that shouldn't exist anymore." Silence swelled inside the archive. The boy drew a careful breath, waiting. "An account," the manager continued, "created more than 30 years ago, and untouched ever since." Confusion rippled through the boy's chest. But the manager wasn't done. He lifted the paper to eye level and added, "And if everything written here is authentic, the value attached to this account is far too large to discuss in the lobby." The manager drew another breath, trying to hide the impatience rising beneath his skin. He had already wasted more time on this boy than he cared to admit, and the only reason he hadn't dismissed him completely was that something, maybe pure curiosity, stopped him from calling security and ending the matter. The lobby was bustling, people coming and going, printing statements, complaining about fees, but right in the center of the agency, it felt as if a small stage had formed, and the boy, with his folded paper and quiet determination, was becoming the main character. "All right," the manager muttered, adjusting his tie. "Let's get this over with." He stood, placed both hands on the desk, and motioned for the boy to follow him into the internal service area. "Come, I'll check your balance." The boy walked behind him, keeping the paper clutched tightly. People watched. Some chuckled softly. Others whispered things like, "Poor kid, must be a lost coin." No one had any idea what was coming next. Inside the restricted area, behind the frosted glass door, the atmosphere changed. Less noise, more control. Neat desks, quiet printers, blinking screens. The manager pointed at a chair. "Sit." The boy obeyed immediately. The manager pulled the keyboard closer, entered his password, opened the bank system, and began requesting the necessary information. "Full name?" the boy answered. "ID?" He handed it over with the same polite posture he had shown from the beginning. The manager typed everything without making eye contact. "And now, give me that paper," he demanded, holding out his hand. The boy placed the paper on the desk with care. Even without knowing details, it was clear the document mattered too much to be treated lightly. It wasn't just an old receipt, it resembled a certificate, something major, something done long ago. The manager, however, unfolded it with disdain, ready to mock whatever he found. But the moment he opened it fully, one eyebrow twitched upward. There was an old bank stamp, from a logo that had been retired at least 20 years ago. There was a signature he recognized, from a former director long deceased, a legendary figure in the bank's history. There was also a handwritten note. "Special deposit. Linked account." The manager's brow furrowed. "Where did you get this?" "In my grandfather's drawer," the boy answered. "He told me to keep it, said that one day I would need it. And yesterday, when I found it again, I came to see what it meant." The manager breathed out slowly. He had thought he was dealing with a childish prank, but this document could not be brushed aside. He entered each reference. The system took several seconds to load, far too long for a simple query. He tapped a finger impatiently on the desk. Tried again. The screen flickered, then flickered again, until finally a message appeared. "Linked account. Updated balance available upon reactivation of original contract. Access history for details." The manager frowned. Accessing the history of a linked account required high-level authorization, but he had that clearance. He clicked. The account timeline emerged. Deposits, inflation adjustments, interest accrued for decades, automatic reinvestments, and something even stranger, a type of asset the bank no longer offered, frozen years ago and later converted into another fund. The manager swallowed hard. He didn't want to show it, but he was no longer dealing with a child's fantasy. He clicked on the final field, estimated current balance. When the screen loaded, the manager's eyes flew open. He didn't blink. The color drained from his face. His mouth parted in a reflex he couldn't control. The number on the screen was unreal. Enough to rewrite anyone's life, enough to turn a 10-year-old boy into someone with more wealth than most families in that city combined. The manager slowly pushed his chair back. For a split second he considered closing the page. Deleting the history, calling someone, anything, any way to delay the unavoidable. But the boy was watching him, and there was only one question in those eyes. "What's happening?" The manager struggled to breathe. "There must be some mistake," he stammered, rubbing his face. "I'll need to call someone from upper management." The boy clutched the paper against his chest. My grandfather said the bank would have to show me the balance someday. He told me that when the time came, I shouldn't be afraid. The sentence hit the manager like a punch. There was something deeply serious behind all this. Something he didn't understand yet. Something that explained why the signature on the document was so old and so important. Something that explained why that account existed at all. Before he could speak, there were 3 sharp knocks on the door. The manager looked up. It was the branch supervisor. And behind him, 2 directors who almost never appeared there. "We need to see this account," said the eldest director, staring at the manager with a heavy look. Now, a cold wave spread through the manager's body. This was far beyond him, far beyond a simple customer inquiry. The boy, sitting in the chair, just watched, but he could sense it. Something in the air had shifted. He was right, because that account wasn't just old. It wasn't just valuable. It was a secret the bank never intended to reveal. And now, because of a determined child, everything was about to blow apart. The manager inhaled sharply, trying to regain some semblance of authority. He shut the office door, turned the key with a dry click, and walked back to the desk like someone preparing to unwrap an enigma that could cost him his job. But he still clung to arrogance, the armor of those who are terrified. "Here's what we'll do," he said, tugging at his jacket, masking his nerves. "I'll access the main system. Maybe the teller misread something. Children don't usually understand large numbers." "I know how to read, sir," the boy replied, breath shaky but steady. The manager didn't expect that. Not the firmness, not the courage. He expected fear, submission, fragility. Instead, he found a boy staring right at him, demanding respect without saying it. The manager sat down, opened the system, and typed the internal code used only by branch heads. The machine processed, blinked twice, and then the account appeared. He checked the number. It matched the paper. Checked the account holder. It matched the boy's surname. Checked the creation date, more than 15 years ago. "This was opened by," he whispered, but cut himself off. The boy noticed. Children always know when an adult is hiding something. "Was it my father?" he asked quietly, never looking away. The manager froze, swallowed hard. A secret was about to be dragged into the light. Meanwhile, the cursor blinked on the screen, waiting for the final command to reveal the full balance. The manager moved the mouse with a trembling hand. It wasn't arrogance anymore, it was fear. He clicked. The screen loaded. And then something unexpected happened. The system demanded a second manual authentication, a safeguard used only for accounts with massive balances or classified risk. The boy frowned. "Why did that show up?" The manager exhaled slowly. "Because," he cut himself short, "some accounts require additional verification." The boy tilted his head, trying to understand. "For children, complicated truths appear simple. For adults, simple truths appear dangerous." The manager stood abruptly. "Stay here for a minute. I'll be right back." He stepped out, closing the door behind him, but he didn't realize he'd left a tiny gap, just enough for the boy to hear everything. The manager hurried down the hallway, nearly tripping over his own feet. At the internal operations room, he found the supervisor surrounded by screens filled with performance charts. "I need you now," the manager said, breathless. The supervisor raised an eyebrow. "What's the emergency?" "An old account, belonging to a minor, with a balance way above the standard." "How much?" The manager leaned in and whispered the number. The supervisor went pale on the spot. This could be a serious issue." "I know. How did this account go unnoticed for so long?" "No idea." The supervisor typed into the system, checking old documents, historical movement, and account opening data. With each click, his expression grew tighter. This wasn't just unusual. It was suspicious, and worse, it carried enormous responsibility. The supervisor turned, uneasy. This account was opened by someone with enormous influence in the financial sector. Enormous. And if the boy asks for full access, he already did, the manager admitted. The supervisor's eyes widened. "Then this situation is even more delicate than we thought." Tension spread through the room like smoke. Meanwhile, back in the small office, the boy stared at the cracked open door, catching fragments of a conversation that should have been locked away with all the secrets buried behind it. He heard words like too large, inheritance, confidential, disappearance, archived investigation. His heartbeat quickened, his stomach twisted. His father, the absence that felt like an open wound inside him, was tied to something far bigger than he had ever guessed. And in that moment, he realized he hadn't come to the bank to see a balance. He had come to open a door that many adults desperately wanted to keep shut. The door finally opened. The manager stepped in, breathless, trying to put his mask of authority back on. But the boy saw the truth now. He was afraid. "Everything okay?" the boy asked, with a kind of innocent courage that, in that moment, felt strangely powerful. The manager sat down slowly. "We need to review a few details before I show you the balance." "Why?" He leaned back, choosing each word like someone walking barefoot over broken glass. "Because your father left very specific instructions regarding this account, and from what we're seeing, it's not an ordinary account." Silence. A silence so heavy it felt like it pushed the walls inward. The boy narrowed his eyes. "My father left something for me?" The manager hesitated for several long seconds, then finally answered, "Yes, more than you realize." The room seemed to shrink. The air thickened. The ground vanished beneath the boy's feet. "I want to see my balance," he repeated, with more strength than he had ever mustered in his life. The manager exhaled, rubbed his face, and opened the system for the second authentication. But before typing the password, he muttered, "You're not prepared for what you're about to see." Tension tightened the air like a wire ready to snap. And suddenly it became obvious. The amount wasn't the only secret. Something else was buried. Something that had been hidden along with the boy's father's name. Something that would now inevitably come to the surface. The pressure kept building. The manager tried to cover the truth. Witnesses began to gather, and the boy's story edged closer to being revealed. The silence in the lobby had grown so heavy it felt solid. The manager struggled to maintain composure. As beads of sweat appeared along the hairline, he kept perfectly groomed. For the first time in years, his polished posture of superiority was failing him. The boy remained motionless at the desk, clutching the wrinkled paper to his chest as if it were the last piece of the world he owned. And it was. His expression was no longer just fear. There was something new in his eyes, a flicker of resolve that unsettled the manager far more than any surprise audit ever could. "Listen, kid," the manager said, forcing his voice into a tone of authority. "You really need to go home. This isn't a place for children. Who told you to come here? An adult? A relative?" The boy lifted his face slowly. "I came alone. My grandfather told me," he paused, swallowing hard, "that when I reached the right age, I should come here and ask to see my balance." The word balance hit the manager's ears like an accusation. People nearby who had been watching from a distance inched closer. An audience was forming. The entire bank seemed to be silently demanding answers from the manager. "Your grandfather?" he repeated, raising an eyebrow. "And what's his name?" "He said I shouldn't tell," the boy replied, gripping the paper tighter, "only to hand this over at the counter." The manager's stomach dropped. This no longer felt like a child's misunderstanding. It was turning into a real problem. "Let me see that paper," he said, forcing a tight smile. The boy hesitated, then handed it to him. The manager unfolded it slowly, as if time itself were trying to stretch around the moment. The instant his eyes scanned the first lines, his posture collapsed. His hands trembled, his jaw clenched. He inhaled once, twice, 3 times, but none of the breaths brought him any calm. This is impossible," he whispered. "What does it say?" asked an older woman nearby, leaning in discreetly. "Nothing that concerns anyone," the manager snapped, far too quickly. Quickly enough to raise suspicion. A security guard stepped forward. "Everything all right, sir?" "Yes, of course," the manager said, pressing the paper flat against the desk. "Everything is under control." But nothing was under control. because the seal stamped on that document, the old circular insignia marked with faded ink, the same seal the manager had just seen, wasn't ordinary. It belonged to a confidential account category buried in the bank's historical records, a classification so restricted that only a handful of employees even knew it existed. And he was one of the few. The boy sensed the shift and asked in a frail voice, "Sir, do I have money or not?" The manager closed his eyes for a moment, trying to organize thoughts, trying to build an explanation for the inexplicable. "I need to check the system," he said with a forced smile, "but it may take a while." The boy bit his lip. "I can wait." The manager wished the boy would say no, wished he would go home, wished that paper were fake. Because if it was real, and it looked painfully real, it meant trouble, trouble far bigger than a lost, stubborn child. He turned and walked quickly toward the restricted area, the document trembling in his hand and his heartbeat thudding hard in his chest. Every watcher followed him with their eyes, the boy too. But before the manager reached the door, a voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me, sir." Everyone turned. A tall man stood near the entrance. Simple clothes, an old backpack slung over one shoulder. His face showed fatigue, but his eyes, those eyes were too sharp. Sharp like someone who knew exactly what that paper meant. "That paper," he said, walking slowly toward the boy. "May I see it?" The manager reacted as if electrocuted. "No, you may not!" Internal bank document. But the man ignored him, crouched down in front of the boy, and spoke softly. "Who gave this to you, kid?" "My grandfather," the boy answered. "He said I should bring it here when I was old enough." The man closed his eyes for a second, considering 1,000 possibilities at once. Then he opened them again, and they were full of certainty. "And what was your grandfather's name?" The manager nearly shouted. "Don't answer!" The boy looked back and forth between them, confused. "He told me I should never say his name, ever." The lobby grew even quieter. Pressure built like steam inside a boiler about to burst. The manager stood trapped between. A document he could no longer dismiss. A boy who refused to leave. A stranger who seemed to know too much. And a growing crowd watching everything. And at that moment, the revolving door spun again. Someone else walked in. Someone who would change everything. The noise in the main hall of the bank wasn't a murmur anymore. It was an active buzz of whispering, pointing, and trying to figure out why that boy stood so firmly in front of the manager, as if he had every right in the world. There was something unusual about him, not just boldness, but a mix of fear and determination, like he had promised something to someone he couldn't disappoint. The manager inhaled deeply, lifted his chin, and tried to reclaim control. "Enough. Someone call security. This boy is disrupting normal operations." The employee beside him hesitated. "Sir, maybe we should verify the document first." The manager turned his head slowly, irritated. "Document? It's a scrap of old paper, that's all." But before he could continue, she added, "Sir, it has a seal, and it looks like the seal from the bank's heritage vault." That sentence detonated in the air. People in line shifted, others stepped closer, pretending not to be nosy, while blatantly trying to see more. Curiosity was now a live current running through the lobby. The manager snatched the document from the boy, unfolding it sharply, finally looking, really looking. His eyes narrowed. He knew that seal. It was only used on high-level legacy accounts created by major investors decades ago, back when the bank was still expanding. Accounts that frequently held millions. "Who gave this to you?" he asked again. But the authority in his voice had evaporated. The boy pressed his lips together. "My father." The manager rolled his eyes. "And where is your father? Working at some construction site? Selling things on the street corner? People like that always invent stories to take advantage." The boy lowered his head. He didn't cry. He didn't answer. He just clenched his fists. The employee who had attended him earlier stepped forward. "I believe he's telling the truth, sir." "You believe?" the manager mocked. "Are you going to tell me now that some hidden tycoon left a fortune only this boy knows about?" She took a breath and risked it. "Sir, The name of the person who opened this account is in the system. We can check." A heavy silence fell. The manager understood that if he didn't look now, he would lose all control of the situation. "Fine," he said, pretending to be calm. "Let's end this nonsense." He typed the code, accessed the legacy account system, and entered the nearly faded number written on the yellowed slip. The screen loaded. A long second passed. Another. The air thickened. Then a name appeared. The manager blinked several times as if his eyes couldn't focus. His face drained of color. He nearly dropped the mouse. The employee covered her mouth. People close enough leaned in, trying to see. The boy lifted his gaze, waiting. The manager pushed his chair back abruptly, as though someone had shoved him. This can't be real, because the name displayed on the screen was one everyone in that city knew. A name that had appeared in newspapers, at conferences, in high-level business meetings. A name that years ago had been tied to major projects, the kind people remembered. A businessman known not for showing off, but for quiet generosity. And then came the final blow, the photograph in the system. The manager clicked it. The image opened, a smiling man holding a newborn baby in an old picture. The boy stared at the screen, his eyes filled with tears. That's my dad." A cold shiver climbed the manager's spine. His face burned with shame. If there had been a hole in the floor to crawl into, he would have used it without hesitation. The entire bank froze. The employee stepped closer, kneeling beside the boy and speaking gently. You're his son." The boy nodded slowly. "He told me that when I needed help I should come here. He said everything he left behind was written on this paper." She gave him a sad, tender smile. "Your father was a good man." The manager wiped his face, trying to rebuild what little authority he had left. Because if this boy really was that businessman's son, and if that account truly belonged to him, then the entire bank was standing in front of a ticking bomb. The employee placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Come with me. From now on, I'll assist you personally." The manager tried to regain control. "Wait, I'm still the director here. That boy needs to provide identification. We need to verify." The employee turned toward him with a look so firm it forced him to swallow hard. "Sir, this is a Heritage Vault account. Internal policy guarantees immediate heir review when the document identifies a successor. I'm authorized to conduct the procedure." Every word landed like a slap. The manager had no answer. And in that moment, everyone in the lobby understood this boy wasn't just anyone, and the manager had just humiliated the wrong person. The bank was never the same after that day. For weeks, anyone who walked through those doors whispered about the boy who wanted to see his balance, and the manager who laughed at the worst possible moment. Some had seen everything. Others heard the story secondhand. But the event became a kind of silent legend among employees and clients. Staff began behaving differently. The cynical jokes faded. The judging glances became more restrained, not because they suddenly turned kind, but because they realized the world turns in ways no one expects. And sometimes the exact moment you're laughing at someone is the moment life decides to flip the script and make you the fool. The boy returned to the bank a few days later. This time he didn't face a line, nor suspicious stares, nor sarcastic comments. The moment he stepped through the revolving door, a guard approached respectfully, cleared a path, and a teller escorted him to a private room. The atmosphere was completely different. During his first visit, he walked in small and hunched, clutching a crumpled paper, almost apologizing for existing. Now he moved slowly, still humble, still wearing simple clothes, but with something new in his eyes, an awareness of his own worth. Inside the reserved room, a group of executives, people who never dealt with everyday clients, greeted him. They spoke softly, offered formal apologies, promised special care, mentioned consultants, exclusive services, technical terms. They wanted to show that the bank was on his side, that what happened did not represent the institution. But no matter how fancy the words, there was one thing none of them could erase: The memory of a man laughing in the face of a child who had only asked to see his own balance. The manager who mocked him wasn't in the room. He wasn't the same man anymore, nor did he hold the same position. After the scandal, the higher-ups had to act. An official warning, a quiet reassignment, a promotion he had counted on suddenly evaporated. His badge carried a different title now. In the end, life did to him exactly what he did to the boy. It stripped away his sense of superiority in a matter of seconds. For a while, people said he even avoided passing near the branch. It was as if the very walls reminded him of the day he laughed loudly, and the computer screen exposed him in front of everyone. The boy outside the bank also changed, but in a different way. He didn't become arrogant overnight. He didn't start belittling people. He didn't flaunt the number he had discovered. Instead, he treated every cent of that account as a quiet reminder of two things. First, of the effort of the man who built that fortune. Second, of the humiliation he suffered when everyone assumed he was worth nothing. And from that collision, a decision began to take shape inside him. He would never treat anyone the way he had been treated at that counter. Over time, the story spread. One person told a friend, who told a relative, who shared it in a group chat, which landed on social media. A video secretly recorded by a client in the corner of the lobby gained subtitles, edits, comments, millions of views. People across the country watched the moment. A simple request, "I just want to see my balance, sir," was met with mockery. And the exact second the manager's smile evaporated, swallowed by a crushing silence when the screen displayed the impossible. Viewers fell into two groups: those who identified with the boy, remembering times they had been humiliated at some counter in life, and those who saw themselves in the manager, recalling moments they had judged someone by their clothes, their posture, their appearance. And deep down, that's the uncomfortable truth. All of us have been the boy at some point, and at other times, without noticing, we've acted like the manager. The bank tried to spin the scandal in its favor, talking about lessons learned, empathy training, and a new corporate stance. They updated procedures, hung inspirational posters, launched respect-based campaigns. But the real change didn't happen in their slogans. It happened in the people who lived through that moment. The boy learned that true wealth isn't measured by a label on a shirt, the shine of new shoes, or the tone of someone who thinks they're in charge. Real wealth shows up when, even with every reason to humiliate someone back, you choose not to. When, even with the power to crush, you decide to lift. When, even with a balance large enough to silence anyone in that room, you choose to use it to build something better. And the manager, in turn, learned far too late a lesson no one had ever delivered so harshly. The chair you sit in today doesn't make you superior to anyone. The computer in front of you isn't a throne. The badge, the suit, the title, all of it can vanish with a single click. What remains is the way you treated people when you thought you were above them. Looking back now, maybe the real question isn't how much money was in that boy's account. Maybe the question that truly matters is, how much is the conscience worth of someone who finally realized their value never depended on what a screen said? Because in the end, money changes situations, but character changes destinies. And this is where you, the one watching this story until the end, comes in. If you had witnessed that scene in the bank, which side would you have been on? The side that laughs at a crumpled piece of paper, or the side that pulls up a chair and says, "Come here, let's check this together"? Tell me in the comments, which part of this story hit you the hardest? Have you ever seen someone being humiliated because of how they looked? Has it ever happened to you? I want to hear what you have to say. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Hit the like button. It tells the platform that this kind of message still matters. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Each one hides a deep lesson behind an ordinary moment. And share this video with someone who's been feeling small, or someone who needs a reminder that they're not better than anyone else. Because sometimes, all it takes for a person to wake up is watching a simple, I just want to see my balance become the mirror that finally shows them who they really are.